So why do blockchains matter? Why are we all gathered here today on this Saturday to talk for hours about a topic so mundane as distributed ledger technologies? Don't we have anything better to do? Well, I'm here to tell you that the answer is actually nope. You see, blockchain technology is not only the most important and interesting advancement in the first half of the 21st century, but it's also the inevitable result of the accelerating pace of human evolution. You see, when Homo sapiens crawled out of the primordial ooze, we organized ourselves into tribes. For 20,000 years, we lived, loved, reproduced, and died in small independent groups. The hunter-gatherer group that thrived on the savannah had virtually no relationship to the agrarian village that starved in the steppes. For most of human existence, there was no global trade, there was no reserve currency, there was no massive government. The only thing that mattered was the small group of individuals that were incented and aligned with you. And then society evolved. Right? A series of advancements in math and science and the arts and governance moved us into the industrial era. Supply chains started to stretch across countries, continents, and around the world. Suddenly, the cost of opium in Hong Kong mattered greatly to the traders in London. Suddenly, how many bananas were rotting on a boat outside of New York mattered greatly to the plantation owners in Ecuador. Businesses everywhere started to grow big, from the Dutch East India Company to Bethlehem Steel to British Petroleum to the US government. Unlike the 20,000 years before it, the 300 years from 1690 to 1990 produced something that was never seen before, the emergence of the global corporation. So Ronald Coase was born in 1910 in a suburb outside of the thriving metropolis of London. Both his parents were deeply aligned and embedded in this new economy. They were both telegraph operators for the Royal Post, which at the time was the largest institution in the British Commonwealth. In fact, many young men and women were able to leave their farms and fishing villages in the late 19th century to take high-paying jobs as professional telegraph operators. In those early days, these employees could move from job to job and city to city, getting ever higher salaries, and thereby they were freeing themselves and their families from the subsistence lives that their ancestors had carried on the farm. Over the years, Ronald Coase became a star economist at the Starr School of Economics, the University of Chicago. But in his early career, he began to take note of the lifestyle changes of his parents' generation, and he started asking questions about why were businesses growing so large. In his grandparents' farming village, he noted that self-employed craftsmen had historically created relationships with each other. But in his parents' London, there were these giant companies that were emerging, and they were doing the work of thousands of individual tradesmen. And he wanted to know, how could this possibly be efficient? So what Coase published in 1937 was an article titled "The Nature of the Firm." And it explained why businesses were getting so large. Coase discovered that the bigger businesses were more efficient at gathering information and managing that information and acting on that information. In fact, the more that it cost to make a decision, the harder it was to find the information and act on it, the bigger the business could actually become that was organized around that type of information. So it became more efficient for the Dole Corporation, which was based in Boston, to own the plantations in Honduras, to own the fleet of ships that were sailing the Atlantic and the Pacific, to own the rail cars that transported bananas to the interior cities, to own the horse and wagon delivery vehicles that were the last mile to get the bananas to the corner store. Each of those steps had massive information gathering opportunities to optimize the sale of bananas. And it became economically optimal for Dole to own the entire supply chain. But it wasn't just Dole. Think about General Electric. They made the power plant, and they ran the transmission lines, and they wired the houses, and they provided the light bulbs. Or the Royal Mail, right? They delivered letters, but they also delivered boxes, but they also delivered telegrams, right? So during almost all of the 20th century, businesses and governments grew to unprecedented size because of Coase's law, which was that the size of the firm scales with the cost of information. And then a funny thing happened that not many of the corporate titans of the 20th century anticipated. The internet happened. Within the span of just a few years over the turn of the millennium, the internet enabled the cost of information gathering to be decoupled from the value of that information. So suddenly the world's knowledge was starting to become free. Now, when I was a kid, growing up before we had the internet, we had one television in my house, and it had 7 channels, and the news was on once a day, and that was basically how I got my information. It was expensive. As a percentage of my parents' salary, gathering and getting information was much higher cost than it is today. Same for shopping. You know, in my town growing up, we had 2 department stores. We had a Sears and we had a Service Merchandise, and so any product that I ever considered buying as a kid was on one of the shelves of those 2 stores. Obviously, with technology today and the internet today, that's all completely different. I can do all those things for virtually free from my home. When I was a kid, we had a big public library in my town, and it had a room that looked just like this, full of card catalogs. And card catalogs are this esoteric system where you have to go and look up information that you're interested in researching and find books associated with that information, and then you had to go into the library somewhere on some floor and some shelf and pull that book, and maybe it had the information you want, or maybe it didn't. But that's how we did research back in the day, right? But today, you know, all that is available at the touch of our fingertips, and it's always up to date. With all this free information that we have everywhere, we need to reconsider the nature of the firm. It seems to me that the cost of information is being driven to zero, and so what would Coase forecast? He showed us that as the cost of information goes to zero, the size of the firm is able to go to zero as well. In fact, in 2002, a Harvard professor, Yoshi Benkler, kind of extended Coase's theories from a digital perspective. He wrote a paper called Coase's Penguin, or Linux and the Nature of the Firm, in which he presented a new concept called commons-based peer production. So commons-based peer production describes a new socioeconomic model. It's production where teams meet each other over the internet and work cooperatively, right? Contrasting it to the corporation, you know, commons-based organizations have much less rigid hierarchy, and oftentimes they're designed without a need for financial compensation for the contributors. It's not to say there's no reward for participation. In Wikinomics by Tapscott and Williams, the authors suggest that people participate in commons communities for a wide range of intrinsic and self-interested reasons. Basically, people who participate in the digital commons love it. They are really passionate about a particular area of expertise, and they revel in creating something new or better. And so today we see the digital commons all around us. We see it in operating systems like Linux and GNU. We see it in knowledge-sharing sites like Wikipedia, where I got this fabulous slide for free. SourceForge, GitLab. We see it in collaborative science projects like SETI at Home, mapping projects like Waze. Essentially, the list goes on and on. Now, the problem with being a big company today is that historically, and even today, you still have a lot of inefficient middlemen now who are still employed to collect and manage and pass up information along the chain of command. And of course, that made sense in the 20th century when information was expensive, but it no longer makes sense, right? Now that information is free and easy to access, and you're competing with passionate people who are self-organizing, you have to ask yourself, do you still want to pay all those layers of expensive middle management? And so Bankler lets us update the nature of the firm to understand that in low-cost information environments, a small, distributed, motivated team should be able to not only compete with, but they should be able to overthrow these large incumbent corporations. Yet here we are still 25 years after the launch of the Mozilla browser, and our work certainly isn't done. We've seen a fair amount of disruption, but not nearly everything from the 20th century. And so the question is why? And that's because of trust or lack of trust. You see, as the size of the firm goes to zero, so does trust in that firm. Back in the villages of our ancestors, if a stranger wandered into the village, the villagers might have very well put together a posse and run that person right out of town. And that's sort of what happens on the internet too. Many small, worthy projects wither and die before they're really able to garner enough credibility to thrive. And so we're kind of stuck, right? We're all excited about banking online, but we're still doing it with Wells Fargo. And so that brings us to actually why we're here today. Back in 2009, an unexpected thing happened. Some anonymous person invented a decentralized, provably trustful machine based on math. We know it as Bitcoin, and it was pretty much the genesis of the blockchain revolution. Bitcoin is an idea whose time has come by using two cryptographic concepts, the hash function and the public-private key pair. We are able to create systems that we can completely trust to maintain accurate information, while at the same time, we don't have to trust the people running those systems. We don't have to trust the people. We just have to trust the math. So with these two mathematical concepts, we can create and share knowledge freely, while still having complete trust that that knowledge that we're consuming is correct. You can create a fabulous digital cat. I can buy that cat, and we and the rest of the internet can confirm the provenance of that cat, the transaction, the ownership, even the derivative cat works that come from that cat, all on the blockchain. But we can also do this with, let's say, real financial instruments. Say if you're interested in an ownership stake in my Tezos bakery, see me afterwards. Or we can do it with physical goods. Say after this conference, we're all so excited that we decide to get together and all buy a Tezos Commons community house up in Lake Tahoe so we can hang out and go ski together. We can do that on the blockchain. We can do it with insurance products and loan products and prediction markets. We can even do it, allow machines to negotiate with other machines on the blockchain. In fact, pretty soon you're going to be able to have your car convince my car to move out of the fast lane on the highway for the right price. So, blockchain technology is the perfect solution to drive humanity forward. We can dethrone these efficient, large 20th century companies, maybe even governments. We can empower small teams to do great things with all the world's information, and we can deliver value in a trustless environment where all we have to do is understand the math. I frankly believe that we are headed back to the tribe. but with the benefit of global connectivity. The way we organize ourselves a few decades from now, I think, will probably look a lot more like a fully immersive version of the villages of our agrarian ancestors than anything like the historical anomaly that was the 20th century. Blockchain provides the much needed link in our journey from physical commons through the industrial age and back again. So I'd like to be the first to welcome you to our new digital commons. With blockchain, humanity has a wild ride in store for it. Thank you.